Hello, everyone. I'm Kurt Doolittle from the Natural Law Institute. I'm here with my friend and author, Noah Revoy. We're going to go over his book, which is he's going to show you in a second, which is called Become Immune to Manipulation. And what we do in these interviews, in this interview in particular, is we're doing a chapter by chapter review of the book so that we can sometimes explore more depth than an author can afford to go into, or maybe it's different as I can get more out of the book for what I want.
And it gives flavor too when you hear the author describe it.
Right. So being that this book is important to me, and because I think it's actually important to everyone, and that some of these more useful books get sort of lost amidst the self-help and fulfillment and personal psychology editors. I thought it'd be great to walk through this topic with Noah. So, and please forgive me, audience. I was late for this meeting, so Noah's being charming, but I only woke up a few minutes ago, so I have my coffee. We're all set, and now Noah, tell us what you do and what brought this book into being.
So I'm a coach and I specialize in relationship and life coaching. And basically that's where you help a person to make decisions with some feedback. So I take people through a process that gets them to the best result for the decisions they have to make in life. You could say I teach people how to think at a very high level. And then my ideal goal is that then they can think for themselves and they don't need to keep coming back to a coach.
Okay, so I get a silly question for the audience who doesn't know any. It's like when I use therapy like most people use the doctor, right? It's like I don't want to burden my friends or my family or anybody. Like, although I burden Noah once with my tough questions once in a while, and he's kind enough to treat me with charity like a lost puppy. But anyway, what's the difference between a therapist and a coach? Because there's, really you have the coach, you have the therapist, you have the psychologist and the psychiatrist, and this is a whole spectrum of people. There's a priest in there somewhere, I don't know where. And you should have, what you'd like to have is a father figure in there and a mother figure, maybe aunts and uncles, right? So a coach helps you. So what's the difference between a coach and a therapist?
Yeah, the licensing makes a difference because a therapist is restricted in what they can do. Most therapists aren't even allowed to do online coach or online therapy, whereas that's primarily what I do is online coaching, which allows people anywhere in the world to talk to me. But the difference too is in how they perceive themselves. So generally therapy is seen as I'm going to take you from broken to functional, whereas I take you from functional to your potential. Yes. And I help you get up to that level. And there's a huge difference between survival. As I say to a lot of my clients, you're on survival mode. Let's get you into thriving. And that's what my goal is to take people at final level so they can achieve their full potential.
There's an interesting question that is not obvious here, is that if you go to study psychology, whatever the spectrum, right? There's a frame for it. In other words, it's an iffy for science, but there is some science. I would actually say that I'm not sure much of psychology is that scientifically rigorous, but it appears that therapy has become somewhat rigorous, at least for the feminine side of therapeutic. It's not so good with men. And so there's two things that come out, I've noticed from listening to you, is that one is that you've had to make the method, and because there is no method, and that appears to be an emerging discipline, if I look at the world correctly, that's trying to compensate for the feminine orientation of most therapy, the curative and feminine versus the aspirational and masculine, right? Aside, I don't know if you would like me to cast it that way, but I'm trying to create a picture for the audience. Is you've had to come up with a system of doing this, and it's hard for the audience to know who to contact precisely because there's no certification process. And right, so it's hard to know that why is Noah really good other than for referrals, which is, I guess, how you get most of your business. So there's a couple of questions in there that I'd like you to answer. And the other one is that, well, how does it, given that you do this, why manipulation? In other words, it's like this tiny aspect. Well, tiny, but it's like a subset of what you work with, right? So you could eventually answer that. And now that I've screwed you up by asking you like 4 questions in a row because I've got my head loaded with them, maybe you can give it a shot.
Yeah, so the first one about systems, the therapy system is based on the concept of care. So as you mentioned, it is feminine. And there is a time for that. There's a time when you need care. Whereas my system is, when I started to develop it, I thought from engineering principles. There's no point in completely reinventing the wheel. Pick something that works. You're here and you want to get here, and how do you do it? And there are 2 models that I use, primarily the engineering model, where I clearly describe the problem. We start to look at what other people have done to solve it, what they have done to solve it. And we go through, engineering has, I think it's 5 or 6 steps that you go through to solve a problem. And then you just repeat it until you get the solution you want. And one of the things I learned from that is you don't need to fix everything completely all at once. Incremental improvements will get you where you want. We didn't start out inventing a sports car. We started inventing a buckboard with a motor on the back that barely moved. So we start simple and we work our way up. And that gave me a framework, which I then used combined with my understanding of human nature. And a lot of it was also what we talk about in the Natural Law Institute, which is the law of human cooperation. Anything that contravenes that needs to be removed, both from therapy and coaching, because if you follow some precept that conflicts with reality, you're going to have problems. And so my system is under constant development. And I'm actually at a point now where I'm rewriting my original book that was about developing agency, because I'm trying to create a version of it that anyone can apply on their own. It's, again, the incremental improvement. They may not get as far as they would get in coaching, but they'll get one step up so that they're strong enough to go out and get coaching. And that's,
at least, I always tell people it'd be great if there was a 1-day class on how to get therapy, right? Because it's actually really easy. The problem is you go in there and you don't know what to expect. You have to open up to a person you don't know about things you don't want to discuss, right? And you have to learn to just like, this is how it works. This is how they do it. What they do is actually really simple. There's a couple of good books that dumb it down to ordinary language and remove all the woo-woo and mysticism. So,
building that connection with the person you're speaking with is not a skill that everyone, including every therapist, has.
Correct.
And it can take many sessions before the therapist warms up to the client. And one of the advantages I have is I was trained since childhood how to create instant connections with people.
Yes.
So that was never a problem with me. 2 minutes, 3 minutes in, and the person's already feeling comfortable. I can see their physical defenses going down, their shoulders relaxing, and there's a bit of a smile coming. And the most common feedback I get is, I feel so much better now that I talk to you.
Yes. Well, I say
that happens in the first session. Yeah.
So there's that aspect of it, but in therapy, what we say is that the problem is developing trust. And and so some people are easy to develop a trust relationship with, right? And they're good at developing the trust relationship with you. And that's one of the things that obviously you're quite good at. Because if the audience doesn't know, he's very busy. He gets a lot of clients. Anyway, so your business differs from therapy in that the way I usually put it is that and I'm sorry for the male female dichotomy, but I work with first principles, and so I work from the beginning of things. And since all human behavior originates in sex differences, right? I mean, all human differences originate in sex differences. I tend to start this way. So what I tell the therapists when they ask me for my opinion, I say, in other words, I don't necessarily consult, but I advise them. Is that women generally want to help on bearing the burden of their emotions, and men generally want help bearing the burden of the responsibilities. In other words, I want to lift more, and I want to carry less. Is a very different aspects. And I notice in your work, you're very focused on bringing people up, helping them carry more. And it doesn't matter if they're men or women because you have both clients, right? It's just that your focus is helping people carry more successfully toward a more beneficial end. All right.
The only way you can reach your full potential is to carry your full burden. There's no other way to reach your potential. And most people will never be truly happy until they reach their potential.
I agree. So now, so you have a business in this. You've written a methodology for it. You're revising the methodology for it. We share in common that we work from the science of cooperation, and so that we're trying to make people successful at cooperating with other people, right? I mean, you have to do it at the individual level, which I'm kind of envious of, and I have to do it at the political level, which makes you feel absolutely powerless. But it's
like herding cats.
So despite that, what brought you to approaching a book on manipulation? I mean, and I view this as interesting because I work in lying, right, which is mostly manipulation. So what brought you to this topic?
Yeah, the things that I could do to help people is such a broad topic that you couldn't make a book about it.
Right.
I'd end up with a book that never ended. I would never print the book because it would keep growing.
Right.
And that's not interesting for anyone to read. What I looked at was what's the most common problem that my clients are having and that can do the most good in the world. And that was what I started from. What's going to have the highest return on investment? And what I realized is it's almost impossible to teach people to find truth. You know, that's my family motto. Search for the truth at any cost. But that's a hard bar to hit for most people.
Mm-hmm.
It's beyond what the majority can do. What I decided instead is if I could inoculate people against lies and manipulation, they could then choose from whatever was left, and they'd most likely get close to the truth. It may not be optimal, but again, incremental improvements.
So you're sort of, I'm going to compare this to world religions, right? I mean, because religions are trying to produce mindfulness, right? They're trying to make you capable of operating at increasing anonymity and increasing alienation in an increasingly populated and complex world. And so what I found in Stoicism, of course, is I see it as very close to what you do. I mean, Stoicism is very positive, empowering religion. But it's not really. Religion is a fancy word, right? I'm using it in the technical sense of it's a method for producing mindfulness, right? Not in the supernatural sense. And so you get this wonderful Greek method of making sure that you are in control of what influences you, right? By being able to insulate. Buddhism does the same thing. It focuses primarily on making you immune to influences, when most of those influences are status games or manipulation games, right? Isn't that what they largely are? And so what you've done is you've moved this religion, pseudo-religion, Buddhism, this religious science and Stoicism, and you've sort of brought it in the direction of a science, which is if you can't get immune via negativa, if you can't get immune from people's manipulations, it's very hard to develop mindfulness.
Yes, and how can you have an accurate view of the universe around you if you're looking through several lenses put in front of you by other people? Right. Everything you see becomes distorted and you can't make good decisions. And we know we're in that position. This is why so many people are frustrated. I think that the main cause of the depression epidemic that we're facing and the drug epidemic is that people know this is a lie, but if I say it's a lie, I'm going to be excommunicated from society and cut off from everyone. And every time you give in to that lie or manipulation, you lose a bit of your sanity.
Mhm.
If you do that long enough, it causes you to go mad. And that's the society we're living in now. It's going mad. It's interesting you mentioned religion. A lot of people immediately think of, they connect religion and manipulation together. But I don't think that's a fair assessment. Religion is a communication technology as well.
Right. It's a form of training.
Yeah, it's a form of training, and it's a way that you have a hierarchy. You know, you have a pope, cardinals, bishop, priests. You can get information out very quickly. In a time before technology, that was how you got information to people about how they should live in a
Mhm.
very organized and rapid way.
Mhm.
And about the time that the printing press and other communication technologies came up, the church started to lose power because it was no longer the preferred communication method for new ideas in civilization.
And you've got
And
to say that religions do create a universal standard of measurement of behavior,
yes,
which allows people who were originally in little clans and tribes and villages to cooperate as trade expanded. The difference is that we'd like that, as you said, to be as true, whatever they're telling us, to be as true as possible. Well, that's, you can't get truer than the science of cooperation, right? As how to cooperate, or truer than sanitizing the information that comes to you. That, in other words, defending yourself against falsehoods and manipulations. So how did you just say, you felt like this, like dealing with manipulation was the first.
the highest return on investment problem that I could address.
Okay.
That
So
was the biggest one. This was also around the beginning of the COVID epidemic. So I was looking at that and I'm thinking, oh man, no one's going to fall for this. This is kind of obvious. And then I kept seeing people falling out. They'll figure it out. Give them 3 months, and there'll be riots in the streets. And 2 years later, I realized that manipulation was a much more powerful weapon. And that's exactly how I describe it. It's social emotional warfare.
yes.
It's a much more powerful method of war than I gave it credit for.
Now, how does manipulation differ from correction? So, for example, we have to live in a social environment, right? We have this wonderful balance of selfishness or pro-sociality, right? That we have to maintain. And this is so that we can survive under various circumstances, right? And so how, we have to be able to correct each other. So
there's 3 ways we can do that, though, to correct each other: violence, manipulation, or persuasion.
yes.
And nature only knows violence. So if we do nothing, eventually nature corrects us, and it's always violent. And then there's manipulation, which is what came after violence. It incremental improvements. It's a lot better to be manipulated into doing the right thing than to be beaten into it.
Mhm.
Okay. But just like we realize in society that you don't beat your wife to deal with her, we now realize you shouldn't manipulate your spouse to deal with them either. And we need to move on to persuasion, which is where we get truly peaceful families, when we're persuading each other.
Yeah,
And the difference is that, sorry, go ahead.
But nature is dumb. It's not sentient. Manipulation works when you have, it doesn't require much knowledge, right? It requires only feelings. But to manipulate, to persuade people honestly and reciprocally, right? That requires some skill, right? So I mean,
it also requires that you have value to give in exchange.
Yes. Okay.
I can't convince anybody to do anything if I'm useless. So that in a world where you have to use persuasion, then everybody has this strong incentive to be the best version of themselves.
That's right.
Whereas in manipulation, it's almost the other way around. The more of a victim I am, the worse off I am, the more I can tug at your heartstrings and use that emotional warfare against you.
Yes.
It's a wrong set of incentives. And we're seeing a society that shifted from violence to manipulation. and the difference that that's made. Now we have a victim society because manipulation is so prevalent.
Okay, so I'm stalling here because I'm trying to figure, did I get all the preliminary questions so that we can talk about this in the context? So how do we summarize the context? You're in this business, right? You're in a business that doesn't have a canon. You've had to develop the canon. It turns out your canon is pretty similar to what emerged from the most rational and scientific, pre-scientific religions. And you figured out that the most value you could produce is to help people be insulated from manipulation so that they could contain more agency over themselves in preparation for having greater self-determination in life. Did I do that okay? Can I get a gold star from the teacher?
Here's the question: why is that so important? It's because we're hitting a stage of human growth, both in population, although we'll probably peak, but in technology and other ways, where our old methods will get us killed. Yes. What worked for the Roman Empire will get us killed. So some of it is still true, but much of it needs to evolve, and we need to go up a level in order for human civilization to survive and continue to grow.
That's a really smart point, because you saw the Roman Empire partly collapse because it failed at this. It failed at the transition. The aristocracy, some of them managed, but they couldn't get it down to the lower people as civilization increased. I always say we didn't really catch up to Rome until the Napoleonic age. But it's really true that we didn't catch up to Rome until the 20th century. So of course we should enter the process.
They were too too paternal. In other words, maintaining the lower groups as children rather than patriarchal, which seeks to elevate everyone to the status of adults.
Yes, which is really. Sorry, boss. Go ahead.
This is their problem, and this is. Still, you see this in Southern Europe in the former domains of the Roman Empire. That is a very paternalistic culture. Whereas if you go north, it's more of a patriarchal culture in the sense that there's an encouragement to grow into adulthood to the point where you can draw a line, the hash line around it, and note that differentiation in the culture.
So can I bait this because I just have to seize the opportunity? So I've always thought the whole anti-patriarchy movement was relatively ridiculous for exactly that reason. It's like, well, we're trying to make everybody a successful, responsible adult, despite the fact that most of us would frankly prefer to be children as long as possible. So the patriarchy is an innovation over what did you call
it? Paternalism,
right? So because it's taking responsibility for making you a responsible, coherent adult, regardless of your class, right? I mean, I always thought, well, what's the whole purpose of Western civilization? It's even when you had slaves and serfs and freemen and citizens and sovereigns, right? You were always our ancestors were trying to say, we need more of us at the top because the bottom is a heavy burden. Right. And so you were able to work your way up. It isn't a caste system. It was a class system. And you had some mobility, as we saw under the Romans, and we see today, which is great for people. It's great for society, but the individuals in the society have to be willing and able and have the institutional support to climb that ladder, which is non-trivial.
Well, everyone likes the idea of climbing the ladder, but in order to have that, you have to have the ability to fall back down again.
Yes.
And that's the part they don't like. And when we're encouraging people to become like an adult, we're also saying you could fall down and you're not going to have a daddy to grab you. You're going to have to grab that ladder yourself and climb back up. And those who have confidence in their ability to do that are okay with it. Mm-hmm. There are many, many men in history that have climbed and fell several times. It's not unusual. Men make a fortune, lose a fortune, make a fortune, lose it again.
I
It's a
have,
normal
absolutely.
thing.
I've done it a
Yeah,
couple times, because,
exactly.
well, mostly because you like, once you've made one, you're like, oh, I can make another one.
Yeah,
Right? But
exactly.
if you're afraid to fail, you won't take the
Yes.
chances, right? And you won't put in the work.
Yeah. And that's what we're looking at. And if you look to those that are pro equality, they're driven from fear. They'll say they're driven from love,
It's
but they're really driven from fear and self-interest rather than concern about someone else. They don't want to fall down. That's even those, people. Why does this billionaire's son, why is he so pro taxes? Because he's afraid of falling down too, because he hasn't earned anything yet in his life and he's unsure of his ability to compete. And so he doesn't want to compete. So he wants an equalitarian system. And, if you're on the bottom though, I don't know, from my perspective, it's like, I want to get up, get me 1 or 2 levels up, get my kid 2 levels above me,
That's right.
And my son says this, he says, yeah, we'll be aristocrats. Maybe one day we'll have a king in our descendants.
Yes,
You
that's
know,
awesome. That's what we
this
want.
is
There
this
we
is
go.
I talked to him about this, but this is really his idea. He's the one that actually started using those words to me when I explained what they meant. He heard them. I explained, and he's the one that gets that idea in my head pretty often.
I think that one thing I was aware, because I'm a very nerdy child. I might still be. I'm not quite sure. So I was conscious of the fact that there is a frame that parents communicate, discipline, and educate you in, and a frame they believe that they are teaching you. They want you to aspire to. And it's very often there's a conflict between the two frames. When that's the conflict, what they do matters more than what they tell you.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the things that you want people to have, what your son is obviously observing, is that he's recognizing the pattern, right? And he's not, how old is he? He's young, right? I mean,
He's 10, just turned 10.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. When I was around 10, 11, that's when I started having insight. So maybe that's, he's following the same track. All right. So where do we go with this? So what I wanted to do in this part of the interview, before we go into the book, is that as I wanted to put your work in the broader context of your work and the Institute's work, but mostly in your work, so that they would understand that this is a piece of a very complex puzzle, but it's a cornerstone of the complex puzzle of becoming your full self. And I don't mean that, of course, I'm sure in your business you want to say this is a warm fuzzy thing, but I think it is a political thing. It's like we just need more people to carry the burden of reality, right? And so I want as many fully competent, healthy, happy people engaged in the production of goodness for us all, right?
And I know that works because I've had several people read the book, and after they read it, they said, no, I had to change jobs because I had one girl, she was a journalist and she was going to be a news reporter on a major station. And she said, after I read the book, I realized that I couldn't be part of a manipulative career. I couldn't behave and be part of that. And that I needed to go and do something where I could be focused and dedicated on the truth. Here's the thing. Don't read the book unless you're willing, unless you're ready for that, because it will change you.
Yes.
Once your eyes are opened to the manipulation, to how it affects you and others, you can't go back. There's no unseeing it once you've read it. That's how I know the book works.
Yes. Right. So who are you now? Every book comes out at a target audience. Like I write for super nerds like us, right? I mean, this book is actually for normal people, right? I mean, you consider it for this.
Yes. Yeah, it's for normal, as normal as I could make it. I actually had to pay someone to help me normalize it.
Yeah. So, well, that's what these people are for, right? I mean, that's what editors are for, right? The first book I wrote, which is on technology, my editor was relatively brutal, and it was useful, right? So anyway, so And when I wrote my book on the future of marketing, which I wouldn't let get published for a variety of reasons, I used a writer to actually write it. He just interviewed me, and uh, and it was amazing how much more clearly he made the points, but he lost all the subtlety of the sophistication I was trying to get across. And he said, "Well, people won't understand that." And I'm like, "Well, that's why I paid you, right? Is because I know I can't reach all people." But anyway, so let's go through this. We've discussed, and so how long did it take you to put it together, the book together?
Took about 8 months or so from conceptualizing what we were going to have as an outline all the way through to it popping up on Amazon.
Great. And by the way, at the end, we'll give all the links. So it starts out with, how many chapters are there? I'm looking at it.
There is
7 chapters.
7 chapters.
Right. So what's the process you're going through with these chapters?
It's kind of like, I describe manipulation as a virus, as a mind virus. And so we're going to look at it like you would look at a virus. We're going to discuss what it is, how it operates, how it spreads, and then what you can do to build up your immune system and inoculate yourself against it. And so that's basically the outline. That's why it's only 7 chapters. There's not a lot of steps for that.
Mm-hmm. When I read it, I'm like, can we make this longer? And
yeah, there will come out eventually a version with a bunch more examples, but for now we're saving the examples for an upcoming course.
Right. So and I'm teasing. What I'm really saying is I enjoyed the book.
Thank you.
As I enjoyed the book. I don't think in terms of manipulation, it helped me look at the world differently. Because I'm a little autistic, well, not a little, kind of a lot actually, and so I look at the world as they're just wrong, right? Because I'm immune, so I just look at it as dishonest. But is everyone who's manipulating you trying to be dishonest?
No, most of the people that are manipulating you, they believe what they're saying, and they're trying to get their needs met, and this is the only way they know how to get their needs met. Because that's probably how they've been raised. They were, I call it mother's milk. They were raised on manipulation, right from birth, and so that's all they know. It's kind of like complaining that they speak in their mother tongue. That's all they know.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I'm glad I've got that point out. All right, so chapter 1 is called "Are You Being Manipulated?" And if the audience wonders why I'm looking up to the heavens, it's because the screen with the book on it is up here. so are you being manipulated? So what are you trying to get across in this chapter?
Most people have a gut instinct that they're being manipulated. They know something's not right, but they can't pinpoint who or what, and therefore they don't feel empowered to make any kind of a change or to put a stop to it. And this chapter is about helping you to recognize that you are subjected to manipulative attacks, to get an idea generally where they're coming from, and then to let you know what the process that we're going to use to help you become immune to it. And again, it's immune in the way you're immune to a virus. I can be immune, say, to chicken pox. I had it when I was a kid. So I won't get chicken pox again. The virus can still get in you. It can still start to affect you, then your immune system squashes it. So even now, I will occasionally hear something manipulative, and I just start to believe it. Now, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. And then I will use the process that I teach in the book to expunge that from my mind. And that's what I mean by immunity.
So I got some feedback the other day. I'm very Socratic in everything. I mean, it's just, so I operate Socratically. Now, I view this as teaching people by helping them guide them. What's the difference between that and manipulation?
So Socratic questions help you to discover the truth, whereas manipulation, the manipulator only cares about getting a result. You're an object, and they're going to get the result out of you, whatever they have to say. So truth doesn't enter into it.
So it's
If they can
discovery.
say something truthful and still get what they want, fine.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes they can manipulate you using almost only truth, just presented in a way which is confusing or you could perceive to be in another way. But here's the thing. You're trying to create a win-win situation. You want people to benefit by having greater knowledge and control over their life, whereas a manipulator only cares about what they get out of it. And if they screw other people over in the process, okay, I got what I needed. That's what counts.
Well,
And
so the reason for I'm asking is how to because this chapter is called "How Are You Being Manipulated?" Is how the hell do I know the difference between someone trying to help me come to a conclusion on my own without right? By asking Socratic questions versus trying to manipulate. Wait a minute. There's 3 stages, right? There's educate. There's pull, which is Socratic. There's exchange, which is persuade, right? And then there's push, which is manipulate, right? I mean, those 3 tactics. So how does a person know? Because you say how it feels, but I want to say, and the reason is I'm trying to defend. The reason I'm asking this is I'm perceiving a potential objections from an audience, and I want to defeat those objections by saying what the spectrum is, right? So how does the person know there's a difference between somebody's trying to pull you, right? Somebody's trying to negotiate with, and someone's trying to push you, which is manipulation. How do you know the difference?
yeah, a great way is to ask yourself the question, do I have to agree with something that I believe is false? Okay, so that's the first question that you want to ask as a simplified one. You know, that could be, do I have to describe this person in a way, this is a common one now, in a way which I know it does not correspond to reality in order for me to be good or whatever. The other is, what does the other person want from me? And do I actually owe them that?
Okay.
So in other words, are they trying to create a false debt?
Right. Is it are they engaging in reciprocity?
Yes, yes. And if the answer to either of those is yes, then it's manipulation.
Isn't a false morality the way they do it? What's guilt? Is it guilt? Or is
yeah,
it
they're triggering
pain?
Emotions. We naturally, we talk about shaming as part of the process that they use, but shame's a natural thing when we know we've done something that doesn't match our internalized morality. The thing is they want us to be ashamed for something that doesn't match their internalized morality. And so they're trying to substitute our knowledge of right and wrong with their knowledge of what's right and wrong, and make us follow their belief system or understanding of the world. And so people who don't have a strong set of values that know exactly what is right and wrong, they're very easy to manipulate, because they will substitute what they believe for whatever the person in the room who's the most authoritative believes. And you'll see this very, very often with groups of people. And afterwards they'll say, well, I don't know how I went along with that, but it happened in the group.
You feel bad afterwards.
Yeah, you feel bad afterwards. Yeah. It's very hard to resist that. If it wasn't hard to resist, it wouldn't be an effective weapon.
Yeah, because we're all trying to maintain the peace, right? That's what we're.
Yeah. Right. And even though those of us who are truth before face, we still value face. We don't want people look bad. We don't want to look bad.
Right.
Our reputation and honor is important. And so sometimes we have to sacrifice some of that in order to speak the truth. A lot of people are not willing to make that, to pay that cost. And so they become very easy to manipulate. And worse is that we have this permission culture now. I can do anything to you as long as you give me permission. This is not a Western concept. This is an evil concept. And it makes it very easy to manipulate people, because you can only be manipulated if you consent to it.
That's right.
And so they want you to consent to manipulation because they feel morally justified then in doing anything to you, whatever it happens to be. That's why the consent culture is such a big problem.
Horrible negative feedback loop. I mean, it's
Yes.
really it's really a crash cycle, which is what you're seeing, right? I mean, that's what you're getting at by why people are in it. So we've touched a little bit on how you know, and you gave us a test, and which was what does it say? How does this?
Ask yourself, do I have to accept something I know that to be untrue in order to satisfy this person's request? And the second one is, what does this person want? Is the thing they want justified or not? Is it something I really owe or not? So are they reciprocal? Just not everyone knows the word reciprocal. So
Yeah, well, we're doing pretty good with that one, though, I gotta admit.
yeah.
So in this, so and the second thing was, so that's what the test is, and then you'll know afterwards you don't feel good about it.
Yes.
Right.
And
So,
usually your gut instinct comes up so fast, so far ahead of your intellectual realization.
yes.
That it's your first warning example. And the reason is our what we call a gut instinct is our subconscious, and it runs 40 to 80 times faster than our conscious mind.
Absolutely.
And it can process massive amounts of information. Listen to that. If someone asks you something and you get a bad feeling about it, then take a moment. If you have to go out of the conversation, take a moment and ask yourself those two questions, because very often you can prevent yourself from getting in a lot of trouble by doing that.
How do I know I'm not wrong? How do I know? In other words, well, a lot of the time I'm dealing with people who have a particular moral bias. It's applied out of its context. It's useful context. You run into this all the time. And I encounter it in economics first, right? Which is where people think that the economics of the family are what happens at international or national scale. It's actually the opposite, right? And so you have to realize that the economy changes. It becomes a different thing at the family, business, enterprise, industry, region, and national scale, right? And so it does vary because all these parts are working against each other and for each other.
Yeah, scale changes the rules.
Right. So I see the same thing in moral intuitions. Like there's a tendency for women in particular to treat the political morality as the same thing as interpersonal morality. Whereas interpersonally, I can judge something, but politically, I have to aggregate, right? I have to look at what's the downside of all this thing, which on a person-to-person basis, I can judge and you can judge whether this is a moral thing. But when you aggregate this thing up here, all of a sudden you've moved all the responsibility from it. So, there's a tendency of people to think in foreign care, right, which is the very interpersonal thing, and be completely wrong at the political scale. So how do I know that I'm not wrong?
Well, how do you know that you're not wrong in resisting the other person's attempt to impose the wrong scale on you? Or
no, how do I know I'm not wrong and that they're actually trying to correct me? And so
okay,
I may be sandbagging you with this question. I'm not sure if I.
Yeah, no, we actually talk about that later on in the book, where you need to know who you're concerned about, where your scale of concern is.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because most people can barely look after themselves. Their scale of concern needs to be really narrow to them.
Yeah.
And so they need to look at the question of, is it good for me?
Mm-hmm.
A father and a mother, maybe they're looking at the scale of their family. If
Mm-hmm.
you're a community leader, maybe your community. There's only a handful of people that can look at it at the scale of an entire economy. And it's unlikely, maybe you're talking to those people, but it's unlikely that your average person will. Most people are talking to someone that can barely look after themselves.
Even the people that I talk to, they're often confused.
Well,
right?
yes,
Because it's
yeah.
too complicated, really. I mean, that's the whole point of the argument of simple rules for a
And here's
society.
the thing, I'm not called to make decisions on behalf of the economy.
Yes,
So I don't need to understand it.
that's smart.
It'd be great if I did, but I don't need to. Once you only you have to master the level you're at before you should even be looking at the next level.
God, I love you for that. But thank you. Well,
You know,
I'm gonna take that clip out.
I tell this to the young guys all the time that are involved in political stuff but don't have their own life sorted. And I say to them, you may be right, but nobody cares if you can't run your own life properly.
Yeah.
This is not helping you, it's distracting you. And so I get them focused on their own life. Then they have the authority to pronounce judgment on higher spheres of influence. And as I said, there are very few people in the world that can definitively pronounce on the level of national economies, let alone global. At that rate, we're almost all kind of guessing.
Yeah, matter of fact, I think I advise this all the time. When people say, when I come, like, I'll promote 6 people's opinions and they're all different. I'm like, you know why? Because we don't know.
No.
We don't know, not because somebody's stupid. It's because it's unknowable. Right?
Yes.
All we can do.
And ideally, 6 different nations will follow each of those 6 different ideas.
Right.
And someone's going to do better and we'll go, hey, let's copy that guy.
Exactly. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
So what you generally learn, and I got kind of annoyed with Niall Ferguson about this yesterday, is that there this is what are the lessons of history of what to do? Well, there are not a lot of them. There's a whole lot of lessons of history of what not to do, right? And so it doesn't help you so much about the future. And it's a little bit like tied back to your work here, which is I'm trying to make an art, is that you're saying, I'm gonna, if we know how not to be manipulated, right? It's the via negativa, it's the same process, right? We insulate yourself from falsehood and the truth will remain. You know what I mean? That's basically, yeah. Okay, did I cut you off there? Do you want
But yeah, no, there's an infinite number of ways to screw things up and only a few ways to make it work.
Yes.
And we don't like to hear that, but this is ancient. There's several religions, including Christianity, that talk about good living is along a narrow path, a narrow path that few can enter, and that the rest of the people go on this big path off to destruction. That's mentioned in the Bible, but it actually exists in previous religions and cultures as well. That concept of, there's a few ways to get it right. And the good news, that's not a news people want to hear when they want to do whatever they want. But for those of us that actually want to make success, it's good to know I can just kind of do what's working for this other guy and it'll work for me. And then I'll tweak it as I go.
So you start out with, are you being manipulated? Then you go to how it feels, which I think we've covered. And then you give an example. Where's that example?
Yeah, I talk about how manipulation worked on me and how I got free from it. And, growing up, I grew up in a very conservative, but very odd religious cult. And it functions on manipulation. That's the
You could have
primary.
said sect instead of cult.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the technical terms. Cult is the technically correct
Yeah,
term, but yeah, I
the
know what you
public's
mean.
not gonna understand what that means. You mean a sect.
Yes, a sect. Yes, a
Technically,
religious sect.
all religions are cults, right? I mean,
Yes.
so if you're in the business, you know what that means. And I'm like, I don't think the audience is going to understand what he meant there. Anyway,
Again, this is why I had a ghostwriter help me write it,
yes.
because otherwise I would have written I was in a cult.
Oh, yes, exactly. Anyway, so you were in a conservative religious denomination.
Yes. And it's a very insular sect as well, which means that the manipulation is very effective because you only hear the message that comes down from the religious center. And all your family, all your business connections, everyone you know is in that church. So when they say something, the social and emotional pressure upon you is enormous. And this is their primary way of both recruitment and of maintaining the people that they have in there. And I recognized as I got older, and my great grandmother helped me with this. She told me, she says, if they continue going off from truth, you have to leave at a certain point. She was realistic. She said there's not a single group of people on the planet that are right all the time. She said, but they need to be pursuing truth, which means drift a little, come back towards center. You drift a little, you come back towards center. And when I realized that wasn't happening, it created a intense emotional reaction in me. And I didn't know what to do about it, though. Yeah, I knew this is wrong, but what do I do about it? And from my perspective now, you leave. When you're in the middle, that's not an option.
Right, that's hard.
And so I realize how hard it is for people that are wrapped up in these manipulative systems to leave.
Well, so
because they're so heavily invested.
Same?
Sorry?
Aren't identities and ideologies?
Yes.
They're the same problem, right? And we have a problem leaving identities and ideologies for the same, because we find security in the certainty and positive reinforcement they provide, even if it's delusional.
Yeah, and we've also invested so much into that system. Probably we've brought other people in as well. So now not only do I have to admit that I was wrong, and my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, and I was wrong to teach this to people. And now, it just starts triggering your conscience. And so part of the reason I got very ill in my late 20s, early 30s was psychological, because I was so internally tore up by this fight between what I knew was right and what I needed to do. And this was conflicting inside of me.
So you're like an ex-smoker, right? You're like, it's like, I smoked a lot, and now that I'm an ex-smoker, I don't want to be around that stuff at all. I mean, these guys that are evangelical ex-smokers. And I'm like, so you're sort of like you sort of like did the same thing. Is this whole thing I didn't like this, it caused me trauma. And now you've taken the opposite thing, which is I'm going to cure manipulation.
Yeah. Yep. I'm going to cure it, and I'm going to make sure that other people are immune to it, because I realized what was happening to me is happening to the vast majority of people in one way or another. Most people today are in a cult or a sect or whatever you want to call it. They're in a religion. It may be a godless religion, but they're in some form of religion. Wokeism is a religion. Communism is a religion. It's a religion with a very clearly defined pantheon and holy men and holy scripture, everything.
Well, there's religions that are silly, but they produce good outcomes.
Yes.
And there are religions that are serious and they produce catastrophes. Right.
That's right.
It's very hard when you're inside a thing and it's providing you a means of navigating the world, and you're getting positive reinforcement from those around you because of it. And it's very hard to say, wait a minute, this is not going where I want it to go. It's not taking me to the promised land of my agency. And are there people who need dependency? I mean,
I think there are people who need dependency. There are people who, for the fact that they were broken as children, will forever be dependents. There are people for development reason. Their hardware doesn't permit them to be independent.
Yes. Yep.
And then there are people who prefer it for whatever reason or the other. We need to disincentivize that, while at the same time making sure those people are safe in society. We have to do some middle ground. We can't abandon them. If we abandon large groups of people, they just cause trouble and undermine. They have plenty of time for that. Who doesn't have time to get involved in political undermining? Married men with a bunch of kids who run a business and are busy all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
The core of society. Who has time to undermine? The fringes.
Yes.
All damage comes from the fringes.
Oh, so frustrating. Can you fix this? Uncle Noah, can you solve this problem for us?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Well, it's the reason why now I don't generally do individual coaching sessions. I'm like, no, you got to buy a package and resolve your problem. I'm not going to anesthetize you for a month and then you come back later.
Exactly. Right.
Especially
you have to commit. You have to commit for me to be for you. I did this with my clients in different business, but it's like I want to make sure you're committed, because otherwise, this takes juice from me. right? I've
Yeah.
actually got to care about you. I've got to think about you. Or I've got to work with you on it. And if it's not going to pay out, it's a waste of my time. I don't need your money, right? If I'm not getting money for feeling like I've done something good, right? Yeah. So,
Well, because the satisfaction of accomplishing the goal is actually a bigger reward for most high functioning men than the money is.
it's
You
true.
find money anywhere, but a client coming back and seeing, I got clients that came to me and were like, yeah, I feel like I'm going to kill myself or something, and I'm never going to get married, never have kids, and they were basically, they felt their life was over. Now they got 2 kids, they're married, they bought a house, they're living well, and to see that you had that effect on people's lives. And I'm gonna know these people the rest of our lives. We'll occasionally, communicate every few months. That's almost like having family now.
Yes.
So you got to care about people,
Yes.
and you got to get a reward that's more than money out of it.
In consulting, I'm like, it's called the negative close, but I'm like, I would say to people, I don't believe you're serious enough about this to hire us, because if I put my soul into this and making you successful and you don't care, I'd rather go give my time to somebody who does.
Yep.
Right? It's the same thing, it just at the interpersonal level. So did you have something else you wanted to close with there?
Yeah, even when I was, though, in the midst of that, I wasn't a good sheep. I was constantly, every time they'd say sheep, like it would bristle the back of my neck, because I'm like, no, I'm a wolf,
Yes,
not a
yes.
sheep. I'm a wolf.
So understand.
Yeah, I'm part of the pack, not the herd.
Yeah.
And I was always the one either asking the uncomfortable questions since I was a child, to the point where other adults that wanted to ask those uncomfortable questions would literally physically poke me and prod me from behind and go, ask that question. I know you're going to ask it.
Yes, yes, that's great.
And then I would ask the one that couldn't be answered, that demonstrated the limits of manipulation within the church. And because that's just who I was. I was the guy that would say the thing nobody wanted to say, that was painful. And that, I think, is part of why I was able to escape as well. And it really is escaping. And I had to do it on my own. The advantage of people now is they at least have my system to help them.
Yeah. So I'm gonna resist, I think, unless you want to talk about the Marco story.
Yeah, that's not a bad story. That's a good one to talk about.
You mentioned me in here. I forgot about this. Oh,
Yeah.
now I'm afraid. Anyway, so talk about the Marco story.
Yeah, so I had a client, and he came to me because he had a couple of different issues, and one of them was that he wasn't very good at confronting people with whom he was not having a reciprocal relationship. So as long as it was reciprocal, communication was great. He's a very conscientious person. But when it came to dealing with people that were hurting him, that was much more difficult. So he had a friend, I think it was a childhood friend, if I remember correctly. And that friend said to him, I got an idea for an investment project. And he gave him $100,000. Now, that's a lot of money to lend a friend. I tell people, lend your friend $100 and say nothing about it ever again. If he pays you back without you saying anything, that's a proper friend. If not, you paid $100 to find out he has no integrity. And that's cheap. It's a good test you can do for another friend. But $100,000, and I think it even ended up giving him another $50,000 later on. And what ended up happening is his friend lost all of the money, and then blamed my client for the whole thing, for paying attention to it. So he's investing the money, and my client's keeping track of everything. He's like, don't you trust me? Why are you keeping track of the investments so tightly? Just doing his due diligence and this kind of stuff. So all the way along, he's making my friend, or my client, sorry, he's not my friend, but making my client feel like he's responsible for all of the things that go bad. Even giving him the $100,000 for investing in the first place, was based on, well, you're my friend, don't you trust me?
Oh, that's bad. I had, just so there's the opposite side of the story, just said I took friends and family money for a company and it didn't work. And it's like, I'll never do it again. Because how do they know? They do know actually, but in theory, how do they know it wasn't, then the reason is, of course, they have clarity, but how do they know that it was that the thing didn't cut out? I've only had two businesses not succeed, two startups, right? And it doesn't bother me when it's investor money. But when people chase you around and say, well, I want to invest in your company because I think it's going to make a lot of money. And you believe it, but it's like, I can take the risk. I can afford to take the risk. But then you take other people down with you. It's work. But that's different from saying, don't pay attention.
Well, here's the thing. If you take money from friends and family, they're not investing in your business. They're investing in you.
That's right.
Whereas if you take money from a stranger investor, they're investing in the business and they're perfectly willing to lose money on a lot of their investments because they know eventually they'll hit one that gives them 1,000 times return.
Right.
So it's a huge difference. And the thing is it's what it comes with too. So it's one thing to lose money. It's another thing to have someone manipulate you and gaslight you into feeling that it was your fault and that you've done something to make this happen and to crash the business. Now, he ended up with a third business partner that also put money in. And this original friend of his kept, I think Pete, his original friend Pete, ended up pitting the two of them against each other using gossip so that they couldn't talk to each other to uncover his malfeasance. I bet you there's a lot of people in the audience going, that happened where I worked.
Yeah, that's horrible.
This is why manipulation is such a huge problem in business, is because it prevents proper flow of information.
Right.
How do you know if what you're hearing is true or it's manipulation? How do you know if you're hearing the whole truth? There's another case of in Microsoft, a $2 billion production of a phone. I mentioned this in the book as well. And that would not have gone anywhere near that far or that much of an investment with no potential for return if there hadn't been a lot of manipulation in the higher end between the marketing department and the engineers. The engineers were very clear that what was ordered could not be delivered. But the marketing guys just said, if we have this, it'll sell. That's true. If I have a magic product, it will sell. We don't have a magic product.
The funny thing about Microsoft, you have to realize how often this happens and how often the opposite happens, where they either bring in a great product and marketing destroys it, or they bring in a product and marketing's wrong. And one of the things we say in Seattle, which I don't know if, you have to be from the area to know this, because I run a big agency in the Seattle area, and Microsoft wasn't my big customers, is that people who work in Microsoft marketing have a reputation for false positives. And that's why, unlike other companies, like if you go to one of the big brands like Kellogg's or something like that, you probably understand your marketing. But if you go to Microsoft, it turns out that when you go to another company, you don't actually do them good. And it is because there's the culture of false positives. And it happened when Gates stopped being the CEO, because he actually understood what the market wanted. And when Ballmer became, he couldn't do it. He couldn't decide. Anyways, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it took until board of directors to come down and speak directly to the engineers to bypass the manipulation. But it took $2 billion of spending. That's billion, not million, people. $2 billion of spending. Someone said that was like 2,000 or 4,000 man years of work. What could they have done with that?
Before the iPhone, you had a Microsoft smartphone. I mean, I had it. That's what you had. That was the leading smartphone. And after that, you had Nokia. Apple came out, and I'm like, okay, they just destroyed the whole world with the touchscreen. It was so much better. Anyway, so I don't want to I enjoy talking about you to you, and there's so much depth to explore, but we do have to stick with the book, and I'm running it 100 an hour, I'm running it over an hour, so I want to make sure I get through the next step. So you're looking at something, I don't know what, and so do you want to finish the story of what happened with Marco?
Yeah, so in the end, he ended up talking to the other partner that he had been isolated from. They both found out they'd been ripped off. But of course, Pete, he just disappears into the ether, probably to do this again to someone else. Funny enough, there was a red flag at the beginning because he told them the same thing he did to them had happened, something similar to him. And again, he was the good guy in the story.
Yeah.
And you will watch out for the stories people give you. If someone tells you so and so ripped me off, my first thought is to call up that person and ask them what really happened.
Yeah. All right. So you say that's why I wrote this book. I've compiled my entire knowledge base about resisting all forms of manipulation so you become immune just like my clients. So how does this book, and then you conclude the chapter with how this book immunizes you against manipulation. So how does it immunize you?
It allows you
I love this chapter, by the way, this section of the book, but go ahead.
Allows you to very clearly identify what it is. We use an acronym GSRRM, so you identify the tactics that are used. So that's the operational things that are done. Once you can identify it, it then gives you, teaches you how to confront the manipulator and how to protect yourself from manipulation. You want to create a kind of fortress around you that allows you to be resistant to manipulative attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And between that, you're able to become immune to it. It's like improving your immune system so you can fight it off.
So, like many things, most people simply need the language and categories to label something so they can understand and organize and think in an organized fashion about it. So you're giving them that tool.
Yeah, the GSRM actually came from you. That was something that I learned about through the Natural Law Institute. And did I know what was there? Yes, I knew every single word that was there and what it meant before. But I didn't realize that that was a series of tactics that were being used against me. I hadn't operationalized it yet, and I hadn't figured out how it fit together. By seeing that, I was able to understand what was happening to me and then explain it to other people as well.
Great. So, so I want to add some weight. There are self-help books that talk about ideas, but underneath this is a rigorous science of human grammar. In other words, how people use language. And the depth with which we've studied this is, well, it would bore you to tears, right? No, we don't want to talk about this in public, because if we go down to, the other thing is, once you get into this field of how people manipulate and lie and deceive, it's actually a little depressing.
Yeah.
So,
It's
can you talk about that?
It gets rough. It gets rough when you hear the stories of people telling their own life stories about how they were manipulated. I had a client recently, and his mother is South Korean, and she would tell him, "You're not my son. You didn't get good enough grades. Go live somewhere else. My son would get better grades than you." And it's deep, deep shaming. And now he's an adult man in his 30s, and he's a good man, a hardworking, intelligent man, and he still has low self-esteem over it. And this is just a recent example. Almost every client that I speak to is under a manipulative attack by someone in their life. Sometimes these are people that actually do love them, and this is even worse.
Right.
How do you confront your spouse that is manipulating you but does love you, but thinks that's what she needs to do to get what she needs out of you without breaking the relationship?
Yeah.
And, this is why you have to understand what's being done. How do you teach her not to manipulate you anymore? Or how do you teach your husband not to?
Right.
You need to understand it, at least understand at the level this book has. You don't need to understand it like we do. The reality is, if you think about something, you think about what this is. manipulation is a kind of magic.
Mhm.
You speak words and it changes other people's realities.
Mhm.
And it's a dark magic.
Yes, it is.
And what we've done is we're giving you the opportunity to fight that dark magic.
Yes.
And you don't need to know the depths of it. You just need to know how to protect yourself and mostly to avoid it.
No, if I wrote this, I'd write it. So I'm trying to again add weight to the underlying science. Is that you have to write a book for widespread appeal, right? So, and that's what you've done, right? This is an easy read, right? I mean, and it's easy to understand. But if we had to go down and teach people the logics and the grammars and disambiguation, serialization, they wouldn't want to read all that, would they?
No.
Right.
I have 2 thick books all about that were written back in the 70s. And I find them thick to read. Like they're difficult books to read.
So, but this is the same issue I've had with one of our other authors, is that the depth of the science beneath what you're saying is not being exposed to them.
Yes.
Just the practical application of it. Right. Yes. And so that the reason I want to do that is to say that that was right, and he knows what he's doing, is what I'm really saying. Right. He knows what he's doing. He's using a framework we understand very clearly. And we have elsewhere written up in excruciating detail in all its variants. But he will give you this GSRM. That's our acronym, right? The one we use is GSRM. But we just use that, and it's probably even the wrong order of the letters or something like that, right? But it's just what we originally started with.
Someone suggested to reorganize it as orgasm.
Orgasm, yeah, I know.
That's a little bit too controversial.
It's just I wanted to go with that so bad, but I'm not willing to go there. Right. So because it's like, okay, well, that people are going to remember that, right? Well, and that's actually because or outraging, right? Outraging is the O, right?
Yeah, we got all the letters we need.
We got right. It's just horrible. Anyway, so there's quite a bit of depth underneath this, and all you have to do, one of the things you did when you teach things is you look for things like rhymes. And what's it called when you say something is
alliterations?
Yes, or when you say some old hen caught another hen taking off alone, which is the sine cosine, right? So I can't remember the name of that is. I don't know why it's escaping me at the moment. But so you have these devices. What GSRM is, it's a way for you to think about, make a list in your mind, and say, what the hell's going on here? Right. And so he's giving you some pretty hardcore science in flashcard and accessible flashcard detail. All right. So
here's the thing, Kurt. We've been talking about this publicly for a little while. My book's been out for a little bit over a year. And what is happening this summer? We're seeing a collapse, not of the narratives, because that's fine. They don't care if their narrative collapses. They got 1 billion. They're creative. They'll have another narrative tomorrow. What people are talking about is you can't manipulate us anymore. This is how they're manipulating us. And we see now we got canceled the ADL. Now someone's talking about going after the SPLC and the all the other multi-letter organizations for the same thing. People are starting to look at the core tactics, the GSRM tactics. Big name accounts on Twitter, and they're saying this is manipulation. Elon Musk is talking about it in words that we use to describe it in our early research. Either he's coming to the same conclusions organically on his own, or the zeitgeist of what we've been talking about is having a ripple effect. I know
a lot of what we do, people say this all the time. I get this from people not involved with this. Is you don't realize the extent of your influence. All right, because it does, like, reciprocity is us, right? That whole Trump and reciprocity, that was us, right? So this is you're seeing this the GSSRM work out there. It's funny how long it takes, but it does get and it's like we're not like, oh, it was us, right? We want the difference to happen. I
don't expect to ever get widespread recognition for what I'm doing. I have put out tweets, and a week later, accounts with multi-million followers have repeated my tweet almost word for word,
Yes,
and then not credited me. And I know because they follow me. Those accounts
yes,
follow me,
yes.
and I'm okay with that. I care that the idea gets out. Would I like to be known for? Of course, we'd all like to have recognition.
Sure, sure.
On the other hand, at the moment, they go after everybody that's making a difference. So maybe it's better they don't know the power and influence we have.
Correct, correct. All right, so you close with manipulation is a virus, psychological warfare on a personal scale, and I'm preparing you for battle. I thought that was awesome.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
So did we get across what you wanted to? I mean, we did
Yes.
two basic things today, right? I mean, we started out with what's behind this and where it is, and then what's this first chapter, and that basically forms the introduction to what. Now, so what are we going to do for the rest of the book?
What we're going to start doing in the subsequent chapters is looking at it from we saw the broad view. Now we're going to look at it from the detailed view. The next chapter is about a brief history of manipulation, and we're going to talk about how manipulation has ruined big business deals, why people are so easy to manipulate, and why do people manipulate others. So we're going to look at the why of it, and a lot of that comes from our personal history and our history as a people.
Right. So I'm looking forward to it. I love this interview, right? I love this. Of course, I love talking to you, and you're a very charming and intelligent and profoundly moral man. So we're gonna do one of these a week, like is our plan. And you have 7 chapters, so it'll take us 7 weeks or so to go through it. Right? And anyway, did we get across what you wanted to in this?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Great. All right, so I'm Kurt. Noah, where's your book again? And
It's available on Amazon. If you can't find the book, type my name in and it'll pop up.
All right. So you can get it on Amazon only.
Make the focus come back again.
There we go.
As far as I know, it's just on Amazon.
Okay.
So it's probably on other places as well, but that's where almost everyone buys.
And your services are at what web address?
You can reach me at noahrevoy.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Noah Revoy. And if you DM me on Twitter with your question, that's probably the fastest way to get a response.
Great. All right. So Noah, I really appreciate all the time that you've put into this. Thank you for your patience and with my questions. I really enjoyed it. And hopefully next week we'll continue. And maybe I'll actually wake up more than 10 minutes before the interview starts. So I'm a little more animated. But anyway, love you, man. Thank you. And
love you too, Kurt.
Take a look at his book. It's an easy read. It'll make a difference. And I'll look forward to talking to the rest of you the next time.